It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hey growers, my name's Lucas and I'm kind of obsessed with growing tomatoes. It's June, so I thought I'd run you through some of my top June tips for growing tomatoes on this lovely, sunny, and humid day. Let's get started. You have to understand something. Tomatoes are vines, and left to their own devices, they'll sprawl all over the ground and become a complete mess. So, what can you do to counter this? Support structures, very simple. So you can see here, I've got these tomatoes here imprisoned in these homemade concrete wire mesh tomato cages. These are cylindrical. They're about 5 feet tall, actually technically 4.5, but I built these back in 2015. And how I did that is I bought a roll of wire mesh from Lowe's. It was a 100-foot roll, and I cut it into 10 sections, creating 10 beautiful, sturdy, virtually indestructible tomato cages. These are much better than those cylindrical ones you can buy at your local garden center, and I highly recommend you try to build yourself some of these cages. So this is one method to do it. In this cage right here, I actually have 2 tomato plants, and the plan is I'm going to be single stemming these plants, so pruning off all the suckers and growing them to one main stem, and I'm going to be training them up some twine throughout the season that's attached to a stick at the top of the cage. And so what this is going to do, someone just started their lawnmower in the middle of my video. Richard, if you're watching this, thanks a lot, buddy. But back to the point here, growing tomatoes single stem up a piece of twine is a really efficient way of growing tomatoes. This year, I'm using the cages to do that, but in the past, I've used a string trellis, which works very well. You can create one using some 1x1s and just some regular garden twine you can find at your local dollar store. The idea here is you're getting your plants up off the ground, growing vertically, single stemming them, which means they have one main leader. And this is a very efficient way of growing tomatoes, especially if you have a small space garden. By the way, if you want to grab a free list of my top favorite varieties of tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers to grow in the garden that are bulletproof and extremely productive, check out the link down below. Another great method of supporting tomato plants is using cages, but not pruning. So this raised bed right here is 4 beefsteak tomato plants. They're spaced about 3 feet apart, and I'm not gonna be pruning these plants at all. They're gonna be growing up these cages, getting really nice and bushy, just vining out, running amok, and they're gonna be producing a ton of tomatoes. So with this method, where you're not pruning, it's obviously a lot less labor intensive. You don't have to get out into the garden, cut off the suckers or pluck off the suckers every week and train them or tie them to stakes. Very, very simple and low effort. A lot of people might say, Lucas, I thought you're supposed to prune tomato plants. Well, I'm here to tell you right here, right now, that pruning tomato plants is not necessary, and you can get extremely great harvests without pruning at all. In fact, I have a video on this from a few years ago if you want to check it out. Another important thing to consider when growing tomatoes in June is to water adequately, but don't overwater. You see, June, at least here in Ontario, Zone 5B where I live, we tend to have fairly cool Junes. We don't really get that warm up until July, and so water doesn't tend to evaporate extremely quickly. And so I really have to do minimal watering in June typically. Overwatering tomato plants is one of the biggest mistakes gardeners make because it's so easy to do. And so one of the biggest things you can do is to monitor your plants and look at the leaves. The leaves will tell you a story. That's what I always say. And so if I take a look at my tomato plant here, the leaves are looking pretty good, nice, solid green, but again, not too dark green, because if they're extremely dark green, that could indicate too much nitrogen in the soil. But with overwatering, sometimes what you'll see is the leaves will start to turn yellow. This is because you have a lack of oxygen in that soil, and the plants, they just can't breathe, right? And so it's very important to really monitor your soil, monitor your plants. So what I like to do, I can just look right now and I can see the soil is clearly moist, but sometimes the top will look dry even when there's a lot of moisture underneath. So what I recommend in that case is to stick a finger down into your soil and just feel. Does it feel moist? If it feels moist, do not water your plants. What is drip irrigation? Well, it's basically watering your plants with a network of tubing, and the water will drip out slowly rather than watering them all at once. So this is probably the most efficient and effective way to water your garden. You can see currently I don't have a drip irrigation system set up, but I actually was provided with some kits there from Vigo Garden. So looking forward to setting those up. Another huge plus to drip irrigation is that it targets the roots and avoids getting water on the leaves. So a lot of people think you need to water the leaves. You don't, okay? Only the roots absorb water. Watering the leaves is actually a very bad idea with tomatoes. It will increase the moisture content within the plants, which will lead to more chance for disease, blight, and just a whole host of issues. So if you can avoid getting those leaves wet through a drip irrigation system, that's going to be ideal. The next tomato growing tip I have for June is fertilizing correctly. Fertilizer is, as I always say, one of the biggest pieces to the successful harvest puzzle when it comes to growing tomatoes. And so many gardeners get it wrong, unfortunately. I'm not going to get super technical with it here, but basically what you want to do is when you're buying your fertilizer, whatever type of fertilizer that may be, is to check the NPK ratio. So NPK stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are the three major macronutrients that tomato plants need to produce a spankin' harvest. And so getting them right, getting that ratio right is key. I always say when you're growing tomatoes, you want to keep nitrogen on the lower side and your phosphorus and potassium on the higher side. This is going to prevent an overabundance of leafy growth and increase flowering and fruiting. And in June, getting that first few sets of flowers out is going to be really important. So if you want to get that to happen, you want to push some phosphorus. Again, phosphorus is great for flowering, it's great for root development. So pump in some phosphorus early in the season. You can do this with a bloom booster fertilizer or some sort of granular fertilizer. Get that in early so that your tomato plants can have those nutrients to push flowers. Another tip I want to highlight for growing tomatoes is to use raised beds. So you can see here, I've got some 17-inch tall metal raised beds. These are really nice. It's my first year using this type, but in the past, I've also used wooden raised beds that I built myself. One of the benefits of raised beds specifically is that tomatoes like to be planted deeper. If you plant your tomato plants deeper than the regular soil line of their pot, they're going to grow roots along their stem. That's a really unique feature about tomato plants. The stems can produce roots. And why does that matter? Well, more roots equals a much stronger plant because you have more of a foundation that can better absorb water and nutrients throughout the growing season. And so if you have a nice deep raised bed filled to the brim with high quality soil mix, compost, peat moss, native soil, that's what I have in these raised beds mostly, then you're really going to be giving your tomatoes a very solid base from which to grow. And tomatoes are very nutrient hungry plants. They like their soil nice and loamy. And so raised beds give you that optionality, that ability to really craft your soil and have a nice solid deep mix for your tomatoes to thrive in. Another thing I recommend for tomato plants is using black plastic mulch. You can see here, looks like I have a garbage bag on the top of my soil because that's essentially what this is. I actually purchased this plastic from my local Canadian Tire. You can get it from any hardware store. It's just kind of like a black plastic drop mat. Yet another tip I have for you is to use black plastic mulch. You can see it looks like my garden here is covered with a garbage bag, and that's essentially what this is. But basically the point of this is multifold. So it's to increase soil temperature, warm the soil, which will hopefully extend the tomato season. And also it's to avoid soil splash. So if it rains, it'll prevent soil from splashing onto the undersides of these leaves, which will hopefully reduce the chance of diseases like blight, which will keep these plants alive and producing for a longer period of time and increase their lifetime harvest value. So while it's not absolutely critical, I do recommend trying out black plastic mulch. There's also a lot of research that supports increased yields. And I found this to be true in 2021 when I had my best tomato harvest ever using black plastic mulch. It's June, it's hot, it's muggy, and the tomato plants are doing pretty well, I think, so far. I really hope that you got some value from these tips. And if you did, I actually just dropped a brand new ebook called Yard Food. I wrote it over the course of several months, actually started a few years ago, and then decided to finish it up recently. But what it is, it's basically a knowledge dump of everything that I know and that I've learned throughout my entire 12-year gardening career. And so if you're interested in really having all of my knowledge at your fingertips in one package deal. It's a short but sweet read. Check out the link down below in the description and you can grab your copy. Currently, I have it on sale for $9.99. So again, this guide is literally everything you need to know. It's everything that I know, and I think you'll find it extremely valuable, especially at that price point. So anyway, enough plugging, enough being a silly guy. I'm going to be signing off on this one, going inside, grabbing a coffee with my mom. Know that you are valued, that you can grow incredible tomatoes if you follow some of my tips and tricks. And ultimately, the world is yours. Scarface. Take care and have a good day. See you in the next one.